Welcome back to the Customer Success Pro podcast, the go-to place for CS pros who want to build confidence, become more strategic, drive results, and of course, become revenue-generating experts. I'm your host, Anika Zubair, and today we're diving into a mission-critical skill that separates good CSMs from the great ones. Today's episode is all about how to spot the signs when your customer is about to churn and what to do to stop that churn. This episode will be packed with real-world strategies that you can apply today and turn at-risk customers into long-term champions. So if you ever found yourself thinking, if only I had known sooner that this customer was on the edge, then this is the perfect episode for you, and I'm so excited to dive right in. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Anika Zubair, and welcome back to the next episode of the Customer Success Pro podcast. I am a customer success executive leader, award-winning CS strategist, CS coach, and customer success fanatic. I help CS leaders and CSMs build and scale world-class CS processes and teams. I'm a strong believer that customer success is not a destination, but a journey. And it can be a tough journey, but don't worry, I'm here to help. This podcast was created to help make your CS journey a little bit easier to navigate. Join me every month on this podcast where we will dive into the hottest topics in CS, the newest strategies, and the best practices in customer success so you can make your CS journey a little bit easier. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast so that you can continue to learn on this CS journey that we are on together. So let's start by busting one of the biggest myths in customer success. And that myth is churn always comes out of nowhere. I'm sorry to say that's totally false. If you have thought that, or if someone has told you that, that's just not the truth, and it's such a big myth. Customers rarely churn suddenly. There are always signs, even if they're little ones, but they are visible if you do know what to look for. And you know what another myth is? Another myth that I've heard time and time again is it's the CSM or customer success department's fault if a customer churns. Again, that is totally false. I really hope if you're listening to this podcast that you know that customer churn is a company-wide responsibility. So if you are personally feeling that churning of a customer or losing a customer is all your fault, please don't. That is such a false myth. And if anyone else that you know says that, oh, churn is a customer success problem, please send them this podcast because it is not. It is a company-wide problem. So if your company is actually losing customers left, right, and center, please know that it is not your fault, that it is a team effort in order to keep a customer happy and make a customer into a lifetime partner as well. Now, customer success isn't about the blame. And I'm not here to talk about blame in customer success because that is not what we're talking about in this episode. But what it is about awareness. And you need to be aware about where churn is coming from, and you need to be proactive with where this churn is coming from. And you've got to have a process around it. So if your company doesn't have a clear risk identification strategy, then you're flying blind. And I'm sorry to say that is never going to be a good strategy to actually address churn at your company. And you know what? At the time of recording this podcast, there are tons of companies out there, especially in the B2B SaaS space, that are really feeling the pinch point of churn. More and more companies are really buckling down and they are tightening budgets and they are not actually renewing contracts. Customer success contracts or any sort of software contract is way harder to keep these days because money isn't cheap anymore. And in the B2B SaaS world, companies are really evaluating if they're actually going to be using a product and service year after year. So that is why it is extremely important that you have a clear risk identification strategy, which is exactly what we're going to talk about. And remember, if you don't have one, you are totally flying blind and it is not going to help with your churn reduction strategy. So again, throughout this podcast, I'm going to be giving you tactical and practical tips because that's exactly how I am as a coach. And I want to make sure that you come up with the right steps on how to identify churn early and actually prevent it as well. So here's the thing. Once you actually do know how to spot early signals, you are going to be empowered to act before it's too late. Again, customer success naturally ends up being a reactive form of work. It's just how we work. We react to what our customers are doing or not doing. But with churn, especially, you are definitely going to have to be a little bit more proactive, and you are going to want to make sure you have the right data in front of you to really be able to tell you to act before your customers are going to actually leave you. So today, I am going to actually walk you through a few things in order to make sure that you identify churn early and that you prevent it. The first thing I'm going to actually help you through is my 5-step strategy on how to actually point out early warning signs of at-risk customers. Then we're going to go into how to validate if your customer is truly at risk, because sometimes we have that effect in customer success, which is known as the watermelon theory, where a customer is green on the outside, but they're truly red on the inside, meaning they're at risk. So we're going to walk through to actually validate which customers truly are at risk at the moment in your portfolio. And then I'm going to give you the exact steps I take to turn things around with these types of customers. So I want to be able to make sure by the end of this episode, you feel empowered and you feel ready to take on the real issue of churn. And now that I've just said that, let me just say the real issue isn't actually churn itself, it's actually waiting too long to intervene. Again, customer success or the way we act as CS pros tends to be very reactive. And that is just the nature of the job. You're going to react to what your customers are doing or not doing or anything in between. But most times, we actually wait way too long to intervene or to actually step in with a customer. Sometimes a very early trigger or an early warning is the exact perfect moment for actually intervene with your clients. Most CS teams rely heavily on lagging indicators. For example, if you're waiting for usage to drop or maybe a customer escalation to happen, or even worse, maybe you're waiting for when your customer actually emails you out of the blue to say they're not renewing. These are all way too late. And the thing is, most of these things can be prevented if you actually have a strategy in place. And the strategy definitely has to be something where you are flagged early about what the risk indicators are for those customers. But usually by the point of where your customer is emailing you or already indicating that maybe there's something wrong, I have found in my career that's often way too late. At that point, your customer is not just a red customer, it's probably a churn customer at that point. And the real key to reducing churn is catching it before the signs become way too obvious. And that's exactly what we're going to be focusing on today is early detection and fast action. So by the end of this podcast, I want you to be able to easily detect which one of your customers are maybe possibly at churn, and I want you to act quickly. No waiting to tomorrow, no even waiting until the end of the day. Once you finish listening to this episode, I need you to act because time is of the essence. And believe it or not, there's probably more customers in your portfolio that are more likely to churn than you actually realize. So let's actually dive into my 5-step framework. The first step in that 5-step framework is define what at risk means at your organization or company. Now, listen, I have been at 6 different startups and scale ups. And the one thing I can say is that every single company I have been at, the risk indicators have been totally different. And the reason is no product, no customer journey or maturity of the customer is ever the same. So, yes, of course, I have pretty clear risk indicators that are pretty obvious that I take from one company to the next. But what you need to do as a customer success professional with your own book of business is you've got to really identify what does risk or at risk mean at your company. Just a reminder that there is no universal definition of what at risk is. You have to define it. And that's what I want you to remember is that it's based on your product, your business model, and of course, the customer lifecycle journey. This is totally unique to you. So my first tip and first step in my framework is really taking the time to understand what does at risk mean at your company and with your product. For example, if you're at a product led growth company and there is a sudden drop in usage, that is a huge risk signal. If I was at a PLG company, that would be my first indicator of risk. But in contrast, if you're at an enterprise SaaS company, for example, and you have a lack of executive engagement, that's a huge red flag. And that would be my first risk indicator. So, what I want you to do is actually talk with your CS ops team or your operations team or just your CSMs in general at your company. And I want you to start to build a basic baseline risk profile. Now, again, it can be just one or two indicators. No need to over engineer this or overthink it. But in a basic risk profile, I would probably use something around the lines of health usage data or health score data. I would probably look at some sort of onboarding milestones as well. I would also look at support ticket volume because usually customers that have more support tickets are more likely to be on that path to red or likely to churn. And then I would also look at renewal cycle stage as well. So the action here that I want you to take is to just create something super simple. Again, don't over engineer this, but think of a risk profile checklist. Again, maybe it's three simple things that your customers are doing that might be indication that they're a churn risk. And I want you to use this checklist during your next QBR prep or your weekly customer review meetings or whenever your next meeting with your customer. And I want you to bring it up and actually do the checklist with your customer. So really go into the weeds of how they're using things. Are the execs aligned to how their product is working? What value are they deriving from the product? Make sure this checklist is giving you those early signals and make sure you're actually validating with your customer. Right. Step two in my 5-step framework is all about watching for those 5 early warning signs. So I have 5 of the most common signs that I have seen across any company and any organization that really indicate early churn risk. And the first is declining product usage. Now, whether you are a consumption based product or not, product usage really does align directly with how much your customer is getting some sort of value out of your product or service. The thing is, product usage really does tell you if your customer is actually using your product. Like, are they using what they signed up for? And a decline in any sort of product usage, whether it's the number of users logging in, the number of features being used, all of this are early signs that maybe there's something going wrong there. And again, maybe not, but I would say it's a clear early indicator that I would jump on if I was a CSM with a book of business. The next is usage frequency. So what I mean by this is the number of active users. So let's say you usually have one champion, but there's 10 people that use your product every single day. And suddenly you realize that only the champion is logging in or only the champion is using the key features and adoption drops significantly. That to me would be an early churn risk and you would have a little yellow flag. It's not red yet, but it's definitely a yellow flag. And then something that's especially dangerous is during the post onboarding phase. So onboarding is critical, as we know, and having a seamless, quick, easy onboarding process for your customers is what's going to really help them see value as quickly as possible. But what is super dangerous is if your customers drop off right after onboarding or, in contrast, right before renewal. These two milestones in a customer journey are probably going to really highlight early churn signals. So that was one of the 5 ways that you can probably identify early churn, which is really all around usage and engagement. The second way that you can probably identify early churn signals is executive engagement going quiet. Now, I don't care if you deal with enterprise clients or maybe SMB or a digital-led customer success motion. If you lost access to your decision makers, immediate red flag, okay? I know that a lot of CSMs work with champions every single day, and that's cool. That's awesome. You have your everyday user, which is really great that you have that great strategic relationship. But I don't care if you customers are only paying $1,000 a year or $1,000,000 a year. You need to have access to the executive decision makers because they are the ones that hold the budget and they're the ones that are ultimately going to decide if you're going to renew or not. So if you have lost access to decision makers, you need to circle back and figure out what to do there because Trust me, the decision maker was a part of the buying process. And if for some reason they dropped off throughout onboarding or throughout a QBR, you need to loop them back in because an early sign of churn is whenever your executive decision makers are suddenly no longer attending QBRs or just no longer interested in anything with your product or service. Another way that you could probably tell if your engagement has dropped off with your executive sponsor is whenever they're pushing meetings off. If your executive sponsor is saying they're too busy or they've got other things on their agenda, or maybe they're going to send someone else as a proxy to the meeting, that is such a clear sign that you've lost engagement of your executive sponsor. And if they're pushing it to another end user or to another champion attending the calls, I'm sorry to say, at that point, you have an early churn signal warning. Okay, the third out of my 5 early signals are delayed response times. So I know a lot of people listening can probably relate to this, but if there are any long gaps between emails that you send to your customers, or maybe they're canceling or rescheduling your calls, this is such a sign that your customer is a churn risk. If you are truly showing value to your customers and they truly feel like you are a strategic partner to them, they are not going to constantly reschedule your calls. Now, I get it. Maybe every now and then things get busy, people go on vacation, whatever the reasoning is, they don't intend to call. That's fine. But what I'm trying to say here is if there's a sequence of events and your customer is not attending the biweekly calls that you have or the monthly review decks or anything that you set up that's a regularly scheduled call and your customer is just either not showing up or constantly asking for a reschedule, that's an early churn signal. Now, the fourth thing that comes up, and I don't think a lot of people really understand this, is negative sentiment in conversations. A lot of times people brush this off because, of course, sometimes the product isn't going to work right, or maybe the customer isn't getting exactly what they purchased. But any sort of negative sentiment with your customers in any sort of conversation that you have with them is truly an early churn signal and a very good indicator that you need to be able to really dive in deeper and see if this is really truly a churn issue. If there's any frustration in the tone that your customer is giving you in a call, or maybe they have to reassess things later in the year, or maybe they're saying, actually, due to this change of roadmap or your product release, we're going to have to reassess how we're using your tool. Immediate red flag. I'm sorry, but that is just showing that your customer is looking elsewhere and they're not seeing value in your product anymore. So if there's even the slightest hint of any sort of resentment or any sort of negative tone from your customers, that is an early churn warning. And finally, the fifth thing or the fifth churn warning that I see happen that a lot of people miss, especially when they're busy customer success pros, are organizational changes. Now, listen, orgs change all the time. Just think about it. In the last few years, a lot of companies have had lots of organizational change. There's been corporate restructures, reduction in force, acquisitions, funding changing. That means that people end up getting hired, fired, or laid off. And because of organizational changes, a lot can happen with an account. If you have new stakeholders, or maybe your champions actually left to go to another job, or maybe there were layoffs in your customer's company, all of these sorts of changes really affect a business's direction. And if any sort of organizational change happens within your customer's book of business, I would be a little bit worried, and it would be an early churn signal for myself. And a great way that you can actually make sure that you have attention to detail of what's happening in your customer's business is actually setting up Google Alerts. Now, the thing is customer success managers need to know so much about a customer. Like, you need to know your champions, your execs, what they do, what value they see in their product, but you also need to know about your customer's business. And sometimes that is so overwhelming. Like, how do you even have time to actually look into all of this? And that's where Google Alerts come in. And that's what I use personally. I actually set up a Google Alert for every single one of my customers, which means that any single time a press release happens for my customer, or any single time anything changes and they either post a new blog post or they maybe announce that they've hired a new CEO or something's changed, Google actually emails me the digest of what's happened with that customer. And it is so useful. And I think that if you don't have this already, please do turn it on because it makes you look so much more in tune to your customer's business if you do have some sort of like indicator or some sort of indication of exactly what's happening in their business. And again, don't work harder, make Google do the work for you. So turn on those notifications. Just want to quickly dive in before we get back to the podcast, and I want to let you know that if you are ready to stop firefighting and start showing real value to your customers, then you need to join me on April 23rd for a totally free masterclass. And it's the CSM Rev Up Masterclass, and it's all around the CS revenue framework, which is the 3 steps that show value to your customers. In just 1 hour, I will be walking you through the exact formula on how to close every renewal with an upsell, build a commercial mindset, and drive measurable revenue for your company. And finally, of course, I will talk about how you can overcome imposter syndrome and become that strategic CS pro that your customers need. And if you've been nodding along with the strategies in this episode and wondering how to apply them to your own accounts, then this masterclass is where it all comes together. It's happening on April 23rd at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and 6 p.m. UK time. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. If you want to sign up, go ahead and head over to thecustomersuccesspro.com/masterclass to save your seat. Spots are limited and they always go fast, so make sure you sign up quickly. The link is in the show notes, and I hope to see you there. Now back to the episode. Now, I've listed out 5 things that can be early churn signals. And the thing is, you don't need to have all 5 to be an actual churn indicator. You could actually just have a customer that has a negative sentiment, or maybe you have a customer that's had an organizational change. Even just one signal is enough to make it an early churn warning, and it's time for you to investigate and get curious. And that's a skill that you are definitely going to have to do when there's early churn warnings. With customer success managers, I find that with churn, it's almost like you're expecting the health to just suddenly get better if you have a call. One call is not going to be enough. You have to have multiple calls and or multiple emails, and you're going to have to get curious. You're going to have to investigate, and you're going to have to start asking your customer, hey, what's going on here? Or I'm curious how I can help with this, or even ask a little bit more about what changes are happening in their business, and if that means that they're going to have a change to projects or what their outcomes are and what they're hoping. All of these levels of curiosity is going to help open the conversation with your customer so that you can prevent churn. Because again, remember, it's a conversation, and in order to prevent churn, you need to be in the know. Awesome. And now my final step in your entire risk playbook is you've got to validate the risk before jumping into action. Now, I know as CS pros, we love to serve our customers and we love to find solutions for our customers almost immediately. But here's the thing, don't panic and don't freak out if your customers have one or maybe all 5 of the early churn indicators that I mentioned in this podcast. What I want you to do is pause. Like, just pause and really think about it. The issue that we have a lot of times in customer success is we go into action mode and we want to help, which is great that we do want to help, but I need you to pause, really understand what the problem is, and validate with your customer. Because sometimes these customers are totally fine. Maybe they're just testing something new, or maybe they're just like changing the way they're using your product or service. All is fine, but you do need to validate if it's just a change or if something is truly wrong. And the best way to validate is to ask yourself a few questions. The first thing I would ask myself is this behavior that my customer is doing out of the norm, or is this normal for them? And then I would ask, have they ever experienced any internal changes recently? So did they change in leadership? Was there a change in champion? What's happened internally there? And then I would ask myself, is any of this product usage or changes that is happening within this account, is this related to ongoing product issues that they've highlighted before? Or has this happened to be something external to our product or service? Because sometimes, believe it or not, a lot of these early churn indicators are false alarms. And that's great. That's honestly great if you have a false alarm. But here's the thing. If your gut says something's wrong, trust it. More times than not, my gut has told me that a customer using our product a little bit differently might be a sign that they're looking at a competitor. So know that there are frameworks and guides and step-by-step processes that you can definitely follow when it comes to churn. But believe it or not, if you have a gut feeling that your customer might not be seeing as much value, or they might just be getting into the weeds and not as interested in the product or service and looking elsewhere, you might be right. Now, here's my pro tip. If you have any sort of gut feeling, or if maybe you think that a customer has started to change the way they're using your product or service, I would actually reach out with a non-threatening email like, hey, I've noticed a few changes on your end, and I was just wanting to check in and see if there's anything else that you need from me right now. Again, non-threatening, not indicating that they're going to be churning or looking elsewhere, but it's more of like a, hey, I've noticed something and you're doing something different, which might be really cool, and I want to help you out. So why not just ask them off the bat and validate, is this really a churn risk, or are you overthinking it? But the beauty of this email and the beauty of just doing a very non-confrontational approach to churn is this opens up the conversation to more curiosity. Remember what I said earlier? To prevent churn, you've got to be curious. Not only do you have to be curious about looking at the data, but you've got to open up a conversation without sounding defensive to your customers or without sounding salesy, because maybe actually them using the product differently can be an upsell rather than churn. But you've got to open the conversation with a very nonchalant, very casual way of, hey, I notice you're doing something different. What is it you're doing different? Maybe I can help. And now the final step in all of this is, once you've figured out your early churn indicators and you've actually identified what you're going to do, I want you to build a save playbook or a churn prevention playbook, whatever you want to name it, that's up to you. I call it a save playbook, but I want this playbook to be simple and to the point, meaning you can repeat this easily with every single one of your customers. The one mistake I see happen over and over again with CS playbooks is they get so complicated. Let's uncomplicate playbooks and keep it straightforward and to the point. This is a save playbook. This means that your customer has done one of the 5 things that I've listed earlier on in this podcast, and you need to save them because it's an early churn indicator. So once you have it confirmed that this customer is actually possibly a churn risk, I need you to act quickly. The best CSMs have a playbook already ready, and they're going to act. And not in the next week or in the next day. You need to act immediately, because the thing is, churn is probably already happening and you don't know it yet. So you need to make sure that you're acting as quickly as possible once there's any sort of indication towards churn. So let me share with you my playbook of what I do, what I call my save playbook. And these are the exact steps I follow when any one of my customers are basically at risk or have an early churn indicator. So the first thing I do is I escalate internally. Remember what I said earlier in this podcast where I said that churn is a company-wide problem? Well, the second I know that a customer is at churn, I'm going to tell everyone, because guess what? It's everyone's problem, not just mine. So I'm going to alert my manager. I'm going to alert the salesperson that actually sold the deal, and I'm going to alert anyone else that's worked with this customer. And if for some reason this customer has given product feedback before, I'm also going to alert the product manager and let them all know that, listen, because of XYZ and because of the early churn risk indicators that we've set up for this account, they are unhappy, which means that they're going to churn. And what are we going to do about it? Remember that? What are we going to do about it? Because again, you cannot save this account. It's a we conversation. So you need to sync with product or support or marketing or whomever in the business that makes sense that needs to help you actually address this. The second step in my save playbook is re-engaging with the customer. Now, this is something that's tricky if your customer is already ghosting you or if they're pushing off any sort of call or check-in, but I would actually offer a strategic check-in with my customer, and I would bring in my executives on that check-in. And I would title it something along the lines of "Let's realign on your business goals." And I would make sure that my senior CS leader is on that call and that their senior leaders are on that call as well, so that it sounds like a realignment call rather than a churn mitigation call. And then on that call, the third step of the playbook is about delivering quick wins. So I want to make sure that in that call, I highlight all of the wins that they've been working on with us so far, all of the goals that they've hit already with our product and service. And if there's any features that maybe they've overlooked, I would make sure to point it out in that call. And I would also highlight that any of the features that they've overlooked, maybe it could solve a pain point that they're having or maybe help them reach a goal in the next few days or few weeks, because highlighting any sort of success or any quick wins that can maybe accelerate their success will totally help you prevent churn in the long run. The fourth step in my churn prevention playbook or my save playbook is getting exec alignment. So I already invited the execs to that call, but you've got to make sure the executives on your side of the company and on their side of the company are aligned. So you want to make sure you're asking for a 15-minute sync with their champion or sponsor, and you want to highlight what success looks for them if they were to stay on track with your product or service. And like I said before, please make sure you have your execs aligned too, because your exec team is just as responsible for churn as you are, and you're gonna want to make sure that everyone on both sides of the fence are aligned to what they're trying to do. Now, the goal of all of these calls, these reset calls, these goal alignment calls, or just making sure that your customer is back in the know, is really to reset the relationship. At this point in time, you're not selling. Just remember that you're solving a problem here, and the problem is early churn. Yes, selling might happen down the line, but you need to solve here. There is a problem, whether it's, again, exact misalignment, they're not using the product like they wanted to, or maybe they had a restructure, whatever it is, there's some sort of misalignment. So you need to reset the relationship, and you need to make sure that you're solving for the problem that they're highlighting. Right. I have a great story of this, actually. I once had a customer who ghosted me for weeks right before renewal. The usage dropped, meetings were canceled, and support tickets went unanswered. There were red flags all over the place with this account. But instead of panicking, I pulled out a quick product usage report. So I went in and saw how they're using our product. And then I noticed that they weren't using a new feature that we had just launched. And then I sent a quick video walkthrough and offered a 15-minute strategy call at the end of that video. So the video was actually only a few minutes saying, hey, I have tons of customers that are using this feature in this way, and I'd love to offer you a 15-minute walkthrough of how to best utilize this for your strategy. And sure enough, they had an internal process that just needed a faster way to train their users. And they loved that I created a video for them. And that one call led to a 12-month renewal. And it also led to a referral of another customer because they just loved that I quickly addressed something based on their data and their usage. And again, you've got to meet your customer where they're at. So if it means just sending a quick few-minute video or sending an email or maybe doing a quick 15-minute call with an exec, just make sure that you are aligning to what they need and addressing any early churn. And the key there was I wasn't waiting for them to turn red, and I actually didn't even wait for any indication that they needed help. I actually stepped in and I saw the early signs and I leaned into the conversation. I was just like, hey, I'm here to help and I want to see your business grow. So because your business is stagnating, I want to offer a way that you can grow. And that just unlocked such a strategic and valuable conversation that my customer really saw me as a partner at that point. And that is what we are trying to do in every single day with every single one of our customers. Right. So in every solo episode that I do, I like to give you tactical and practical tips to try in your CS journey because that's exactly how I am as a coach. So this week, I'm here to give you your weekly challenge. And this week, I want you to pick 3 of your current accounts and run them through a risk check. So go and build that risk check that I talked about earlier in this podcast. And I want you to ask yourself, Have I seen any early warning signs with any of these customers? Or ask yourself the question, do I know what triggers would create a save play? And then finally, ask yourself, have I been proactive with these three customers or just reactive? Now, you don't need fancy CS tools because I know a lot of times people who are listening to this podcast are like, listen, I don't have the data or I don't have a fancy tool or the CRM is just not up to date. You don't need any of this to do that. You just need your brain, maybe a spreadsheet, and just a few strategic questions. And once you have that laid out, you have got to make your CS churn playbook or your CS save playbook, whatever you want to name it. And once you've created that playbook, I want you to send me a text because I want to hear how you're using it and how it went with your first customer. So if you want to text me, there's a link in the show notes of this episode. So feel free to send me a message via text and let me know how it goes. Or if you want, you can definitely send me a message on LinkedIn. If you found this episode helpful, please make sure you share it with a fellow CSM or drop a comment on LinkedIn with your biggest takeaway. And if this episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe or leave a review and share it with a fellow CSM. Did you know that we have over 1,500 listeners per episode, but only 250 of you are actually subscribed or follow this podcast? Please go ahead and follow this podcast so you're notified immediately when I drop my next episode. Right. I went over tons of frameworks in today's episode, and I hope you guys took tons of notes, and I cannot wait to hear how your churn prevention or save playbooks work for you. But if you want more frameworks like this, you need to join my coaching program, CSM RevUp Academy, where we go even deeper into customer retention strategies, renewal prep, and revenue generation. This is my signature coaching program designed to help you master revenue generating strategies like this and more. And there is a VIP waitlist for when I next open my doors for enrollment, which is actually opening on April 23rd. So if you want to dive deeper into the strategies that are discussed in this podcast and get my step-by-step playbook and how to be more commercially minded and revenue focused, then go ahead and go to thecustomersuccesspro.com/RevUp to sign up for the waitlist. Now, I hope you enjoyed this podcast and I hope you got tactical tips and tricks to take back to your team. Everything I mentioned in this podcast is linked in the show notes below. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Keep showing up, keep serving your customers, and keep growing as a customer success pro that I know you are. I'll catch you next week for our next episode. Thank you for listening to the Customer Success Pro podcast today. I hope you learned something new to take back to your team and your company. If you enjoyed today's episode, please can you take 1 minute to give me a positive review on Apple Podcasts? It takes a lot of time and energy to create an episode, and I want to continue to create more for you. But it would be great to know that you are enjoying these episodes. Also, do not forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, as I release a new podcast every month. And if you have any topics that you would like me to discuss in the future, or you would like to be a guest on this podcast, please feel free to reach out. All my contact details are in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it because sharing is caring. Thanks again for listening and tune in next time for more on customer success. Cheers to your CS journey and catch you next time.